Arman had never imagined that his life would change in a single moment on a rainy night. He was just a simple delivery boy riding through the busy streets of the city with a worn-out bike and a heart full of quiet dreams. His life was not filled with luxury or comfort, but it had one purpose that kept him going every single day. That purpose was his mother, who was sick and waiting for him at home. Every delivery he made was not just a job, but a step closer to buying her medicine and keeping her alive. The city around him never noticed him because he was invisible to the world. People opened doors, took their food, and closed them without even making eye contact. Still, Arman never complained because he believed that hard work would one day bring him peace. That night the sky was filled with dark clouds and heavy rain began to fall as if the world itself was crying. The roads became slippery and dangerous, but Arman continued riding because he had one last delivery left. He looked at his phone and saw the address while thinking about his mother waiting for her medicine. He whispered to himself that this delivery would be the final one for the night, and then he would go home quickly. His clothes were already wet and cold, but his determination was stronger than the storm. As he rode through the empty road, the street lights reflected on the wet ground, creating a lonely and haunting view. The sound of rain hitting the ground was loud, but his thoughts were louder. He remembered his mother smiling weakly and telling him to take care of himself. He promised her that he would come back soon and bring her medicine. That promise was everything to him, and he could not afford to break it. As he turned onto a quieter road, something felt strange, as if danger was waiting in silence. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of him, blinding his eyes completely. It was a luxury car moving at high speed without slowing down. Arman tried to control his bike, but the wet road betrayed him and his tires slipped. The moment stretched like time itself had slowed down. His heart pounded loudly and his mind filled with fear and confusion. He could not see clearly, but he knew that the car was too close. There was no escape and no time left. The sound of the crash echoed through the empty street as metal collided with metal and his body was thrown into the air. He hit the ground with force and pain shot through every part of his body. The rain continued to fall, mixing with his blood as he struggled to breathe. His vision became blurry and his ears rang with a strange silence. He tried to move, but his body refused to respond. In that helpless moment, he realized how fragile life truly was. Through his fading vision, he saw the car stop and a man step out slowly. The man was dressed in an expensive suit and carried himself with confidence and cold authority. His face showed no panic and no concern, as if accidents like this were nothing to him. Arman tried to speak and asked for help, but his voice was too weak to be heard. The man looked at him for a brief second, but there was no emotion in his eyes. Instead of helping him, the man took out his phone and made a call. He spoke calmly, as if discussing a business deal rather than a human life lying on the ground. He told someone to handle the situation and made it clear that he did not want any trouble. Arman listened with disbelief as he realized that this man had no intention of saving him. The rain grew heavier and the cold began to creep into his body. He wanted to scream, but he could not even lift his head. The man turned away and walked back to his car without looking back again. In that moment, Arman understood that he meant nothing to him. The car engine started, and within seconds it disappeared into the darkness, leaving him alone on the road. The sound of the car fading away felt like hope itself was leaving him behind. Arman lay there struggling between life and death while the world continued moving without him. His thoughts turned to his mother and the promise he made to her. He felt a deep pain in his heart, not because of the accident, but because he might never see her again. Tears mixed with rain on his face as regret filled his mind. He wished he had been faster or more careful, or somehow avoided that road. But fate had already decided his path. Minutes felt like hours as he drifted in and out of consciousness. The cold ground beneath him reminded him that he was still alive, but barely holding on. He tried to hold onto the image of his mother smiling, because that was the only thing giving him strength. The world around him was silent except for the rain and the distant sound of thunder. He felt completely alone, abandoned by the person who caused his suffering. In those final moments before darkness took over, his thoughts became slower and weaker. He wondered if anyone would find him or if he would disappear without a trace. The idea of being forgotten scared him more than death itself. His breathing became shallow and his eyes slowly closed as the darkness surrounded him. The last thing he felt was the cold rain on his skin and the pain in his chest. The last thing he thought about was his mother waiting for him. And then everything went black, as if the world had erased him completely. Arman slowly opened his eyes after what felt like an endless darkness, and the first thing he saw was a plain white ceiling that made him realize he was still alive. His body felt heavy and broken, as if every bone had been shattered and rebuilt with pain. The faint sound of hospital machines filled the room while his mind struggled to remember what had happened. The memories came back like a storm as the crash replayed in his head, and his heart began to race with fear and confusion. He tried to move his hand, but even that small effort sent sharp pain through his body. His lips were dry and his voice weak, but he gathered all his strength to whisper one word. He called out for his mother because she was the only person who mattered to him in that moment. The room stayed silent and no answer came, which made his heart sink with a strange fear. A nurse standing nearby noticed that he was awake and quickly moved closer to check on him. Her face showed a mix of relief and hesitation, as if she was hiding something difficult to say. Arman looked at her with desperate eyes and asked about his mother again because he needed to know if she was safe. The nurse paused for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully, and that silence felt heavier than any truth. Finally, she spoke in a soft voice and told him that no one had brought medicine for his mother. Her words were slow and painful, and each one felt like a sharp knife cutting through his heart. She then told him that his mother had passed away while he was lying unconscious in the hospital. The world around Arman shattered into pieces in that instant, and he felt a deep emptiness take over his soul. His chest tightened and tears began to fall without control as he realized that he had failed the one person he loved the most. The pain of his injuries meant nothing compared to the pain of losing his mother. He wanted to scream and cry and turn back time, but all he could do was lie there helplessly. He remembered her weak smile and the way she always believed in him even when the world ignored him. He had promised her that he would return with medicine, but that promise was now broken forever. Days passed slowly as Arman remained in the hospital, surrounded by silence and grief. No friends came to visit and no family stood by his side because he had always been alone except for his mother. The loneliness grew stronger with each passing hour, and the walls of the hospital felt like a prison. He kept replaying the accident in his mind, and the face of the man who left him to die haunted him constantly. He could not understand how someone could be so heartless and powerful at the same time. One afternoon, a well-dressed man entered his room without knocking, and his presence immediately felt different. He carried confidence and authority in his posture, and his expression showed no sympathy. Arman looked at him with tired eyes, wondering who he was and why he had come. The man introduced himself as a representative of Malik Corporation and placed a file on the table beside Arman. He spoke in a calm and controlled tone, as if discussing something routine and unimportant. He explained that the accident was unfortunate, but it needed to be resolved quickly and quietly. He then asked Arman to sign some documents that would declare the accident as his own fault. Arman felt a surge of anger rise within him as he realized what was happening. The powerful man who hit him was trying to escape responsibility by erasing the truth. The representative assured him that he would receive some money in return, which he described as compensation. The word compensation sounded hollow and insulting because it could never bring back his mother. Arman looked at the papers and saw how his story was being twisted into a lie. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed the documents away with whatever strength he had left. He refused to sign them because he knew that doing so would mean accepting injustice. The man's expression changed slightly, but he remained calm, as if he expected resistance. He leaned closer and spoke in a colder tone, telling Arman that he should think carefully. He warned him that fighting against powerful people would only bring more suffering into his life. He reminded him that he had no money, no support, and no influence in the world. His words were meant to break Arman's spirit and force him into submission. But instead of breaking him, they ignited something deep inside him. Arman felt a burning anger mixed with grief and determination. He realized that he had already lost everything that mattered, so there was nothing left to fear. He looked directly into the man's eyes and said that he would never sign the papers. His voice was weak, but his resolve was unshakable. The man straightened up and smirked slightly, as if amused by Arman's courage. He told him that people like him always think they can fight back, but they eventually disappear. He picked up the documents and walked out of the room, leaving behind a heavy silence. That moment marked the beginning of something new inside Arman. He was no longer just a victim of an accident, but a witness to a cruel system that protected the powerful. The pain of his mother's death and the injustice he faced combined into a single powerful emotion. It was not just anger, but a deep desire for justice and change. As days turned into nights, Arman lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. He realized that the world he lived in was unfair and controlled by people who believed they were untouchable. He understood that if he stayed weak and silent, nothing would ever change. The thought of his mother gave him strength and reminded him of why he needed to keep going. He promised himself that he would not let her death be meaningless. He began to think differently and plan his future with a new mindset. Instead of feeling helpless, he started to imagine becoming strong enough to challenge those who had wronged him. The idea seemed impossible at first, but it slowly became a goal that gave him purpose. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult and filled with obstacles, but he was ready to face them. The boy who once delivered food to survive was starting to transform into someone driven by purpose. He decided that he would rise from his pain and rebuild his life from nothing. He would learn new skills and gain knowledge that could help him grow stronger. He would no longer depend on luck or hope because he understood that power had to be earned. The memory of the man who left him on the road became a constant reminder of what he needed to overcome. Arman closed his eyes that night not as a broken victim but as someone who had made a decision. He chose to fight back against the injustice that had destroyed his life. He chose to become someone who could never be ignored again. And in that quiet hospital room, a new journey began without anyone realizing it. After leaving the hospital, Arman did not return to his old life because that version of him had died on the road the night of the crash. He disappeared from the places that once defined him and stepped into a world where survival required more than just hard work. The city continued moving without noticing his absence, just as it had ignored his existence before. But this time Arman chose to remain unseen because invisibility had become his greatest advantage. He rented a small and quiet room in a distant part of the city where no one asked questions and no one cared about his past. Every day he woke up with a single purpose, and that purpose was to rebuild himself from nothing. His body slowly healed, but the pain inside him transformed into determination that refused to fade. He spent hours reading books about business, technology, finance, and human psychology because he understood that knowledge was power. At first, everything felt difficult and overwhelming because he had never been exposed to such complex ideas before. But he remained patient and disciplined because he had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He sold his old bike and used the money to buy a second-hand laptop that became his most valuable tool. He taught himself how to use the internet not just for information but for opportunity and strategy. Nights turned into long sessions of learning as he explored coding, data systems, and digital security. He made mistakes and faced failures, but each setback only strengthened his resolve. Slowly, he began to understand how powerful systems worked and how they could be manipulated. He realized that behind every large corporation there were hidden flaws and vulnerabilities waiting to be exposed. This realization opened a new path for him, and he started experimenting with small digital tasks. He took freelance work under fake names and completed projects that helped him improve his skills. With every success, his confidence grew and he started to believe in his own potential. Months passed and Arman became someone completely different from the boy he used to be. He no longer saw himself as weak or powerless because he had proven that he could adapt and evolve. During this time, he also connected with people who lived in the shadows of society. Some were skilled hackers while others were victims of powerful individuals who had been wronged. These connections helped him learn faster and gave him insight into a hidden world that most people never see. He listened to their stories and realized that he was not alone in his suffering. Many people had been crushed by the same system that had taken everything from him. This understanding gave him a sense of purpose beyond personal revenge. He wanted to challenge a system that protected the powerful and silenced the weak. Years passed and Arman continued building his knowledge and influence step by step. He invested small amounts of money into online ventures and slowly multiplied his earnings through careful decisions. He studied market trends and business strategies with intense focus. He learned how to predict outcomes and make moves that others could not see. His mind became sharp and strategic as he mastered the art of planning ahead. Eventually, he created a small company under a new identity that allowed him to operate without revealing his past. That company grew faster than expected because Arman understood how to use information as a weapon. He identified weaknesses in larger companies and used those gaps to create opportunities for himself. Within a few years, his company expanded into multiple sectors, including technology, finance, and logistics. The name of his company began to appear in business circles, and people became curious about the mysterious founder. No one knew who he was or where he came from, but his influence continued to grow. Arman remained hidden behind layers of security and anonymity because he was not ready to reveal himself yet. His transformation was not just external but also internal as he learned to control his emotions and think logically. The anger that once consumed him was now focused into a clear and calculated goal. He never forgot the night of the accident or the loss of his mother because those memories fueled his journey. At the same time, he trained himself to remain calm and patient because revenge required precision, not impulse. As his power increased, he began to study the empire of the man who had destroyed his life. He gathered information about Zayn Malik and his corporation with extreme attention to detail. He analyzed financial records, business deals, and hidden transactions that revealed the truth behind the public image. What he discovered confirmed his suspicions that the empire was built on corruption and exploitation. There were illegal deals hidden behind legal structures and unethical practices disguised as success. Arman carefully collected evidence and stored it securely because he knew it would be important later. He also built a network of trusted individuals who shared his vision and supported his mission. These people respected him not just for his intelligence but also for his determination and leadership. Together they formed a silent force that operated behind the scenes without attracting attention. As time went on, Arman reached a point where he had more power than he had ever imagined. His company became a major player in the market and his financial strength allowed him to influence large decisions. Despite all this success, he never allowed himself to become arrogant or careless. He remained focused on his ultimate goal, which was to bring justice to those who had wronged him. The moment he had been preparing for was finally approaching and he could feel it. He knew that taking down someone as powerful as Zayn Malik would not be easy. It required a perfect plan with no room for error because one mistake could destroy everything he had built. Arman spent months designing a strategy that would attack the empire from multiple angles. He identified key weaknesses and created a timeline that ensured maximum impact. Every step of the plan was calculated and tested to avoid failure. He understood that patience was his greatest weapon and he was willing to wait for the right moment. As he stood in his office looking over the city skyline, he reflected on his journey. The same city that once ignored him was now part of his domain. The delivery boy who struggled to survive had become a powerful figure capable of changing lives. But for Arman, this was not the end of his story because his purpose had not yet been fulfilled. He closed his eyes for a moment and remembered his mother's face. That memory reminded him of why he started this journey and why he needed to finish it. When he opened his eyes again, there was no hesitation left in him. He was ready to move forward and execute his plan. The rise of the forgotten boy had reached its peak and the next step would shake the world. Zayn Malik sat comfortably in his luxurious office high above the city, believing that his power was absolute and unchallengeable. The glass walls around him reflected a man who had built an empire through control, influence, and fear. He was used to winning every battle without facing consequences, and he trusted his system completely. That morning started like any other day with meetings, calls, and decisions that affected thousands of lives. He had no idea that his world was about to change in a way he could never imagine. As he reached for his tablet to check financial updates, the screen suddenly flickered for a brief moment. At first he ignored it, thinking it was a minor technical glitch, but then the screen went dark and restarted on its own. A message appeared in bold, clear words that immediately caught his attention. It said, "You have 72 hours to confess or lose everything." Zayn stared at the message with disbelief before letting out a small laugh because he thought it was a joke. He had faced threats before and none of them had ever come close to harming him. He signaled his security team to investigate the source of the message while continuing his work as if nothing had happened. Within minutes, his assistant rushed into the office with a worried expression that he had never seen before. She informed him that something was wrong with the company accounts and that several transactions had been blocked unexpectedly. Zayn frowned and quickly accessed his financial systems, only to find that major accounts were frozen without explanation. His confidence began to shake slightly, but he still believed it was a temporary issue that could be fixed. As time passed, more alarming news arrived from different departments. Investors started withdrawing their funds and key partners began canceling agreements without clear reasons. The stock value of his company started dropping rapidly, causing panic among stakeholders. Zayn's calm demeanor slowly turned into frustration as he realized that this was not a coincidence. Someone was attacking his empire in a precise and calculated manner. He demanded answers from his team, but no one could identify the source of the problem. The systems were being manipulated from a level that seemed impossible to reach. Hours passed and the situation only grew worse as confidential information began leaking online. Documents that exposed hidden deals and illegal activities were suddenly available to the public. Media outlets picked up the story and began broadcasting the scandal across the country. Zion watched in shock as his carefully constructed image collapsed in front of the world. His phone rang continuously with calls from partners, lawyers, and officials demanding explanations. The power he once held over others was slipping away with every passing minute. Late that evening, another message appeared on his screen reminding him that the countdown had begun. It repeated the warning that he had 72 hours to confess or face complete destruction. This time the message included a line that made his heart stop for a moment. It said, "Remember the delivery boy you left to die." Zion felt a sudden chill as memories from that night surfaced in his mind. He tried to dismiss the thought, but something deep inside him knew that this was connected to his past actions. For the first time in years, fear began to take hold of him. He realized that this was not a random attack, but a personal vendetta driven by someone who knew his secrets. Desperate to regain control, he ordered a full investigation using all available resources. His team worked tirelessly, but every attempt to trace the attacker failed. It was as if the person behind this was always one step ahead and completely invisible. As the hours continued to pass, the damage became irreversible. His company lost credibility and trust while legal authorities began preparing cases against him. The empire he had spent years building was collapsing faster than he could react. On the second day, he received a final instruction telling him to come alone to an abandoned warehouse at midnight. The message warned that this was his only chance to understand what was happening. With no other options left, Zion decided to go because he needed answers. That night he arrived at the location with a mix of anger and fear in his heart. The warehouse was dark and silent, creating an unsettling atmosphere. He stepped inside cautiously and looked around, trying to identify any sign of movement. Suddenly a voice echoed from the shadows, calling his name in a calm and controlled tone. Zion turned toward the sound and saw a man slowly stepping into the light. The man's presence was confident and composed, as if he was completely in control of the situation. Zion demanded to know who he was and what he wanted, but the man simply smiled slightly. There was something familiar about him that Zion could not immediately recognize. The man spoke again, reminding him of a rainy night and a broken body lying on the road. As those words sank in, Zion's eyes widened with realization and shock. He took a step back as he struggled to process what he was seeing. He whispered that it was impossible because the person he left that night could not have survived. The man nodded calmly and confirmed that he was the same delivery boy who had been abandoned. He introduced himself as Arman and looked directly into Zion's eyes without fear. Zion felt his strength fade as he realized the truth behind the destruction of his empire. He dropped to his knees and began pleading for mercy, offering money, power, and anything Arman desired. His voice trembled with desperation as he tried to bargain for his life and reputation. Arman listened quietly without showing any emotion because he had already made his decision. He told Zion that he did not want his money or his power because those things meant nothing to him. He explained that all he ever wanted was justice for the life that had been destroyed. Arman then revealed that all the evidence of Zion's crimes had already been sent to the authorities and media. There was nothing left that could stop the consequences from reaching him. Zion realized that he had lost everything and that his actions had finally caught up with him. Within hours, law enforcement arrived and took him into custody while the world watched his downfall. News channels covered the story extensively, showing how a powerful man had been brought down by his own wrongdoing. Arman walked away from the warehouse without looking back because his mission was complete. He did not feel joy or satisfaction in the way he had imagined because revenge did not erase his pain. Instead, he felt a quiet sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served. The journey that began with loss and suffering had finally reached its end. The boy who was once ignored by the world had proven that even the weakest person could rise and challenge the strongest. Arman later visited his mother's grave, carrying flowers and memories that would never fade. He stood there in silence, reflecting on everything he had been through and everything he had become. He apologized for not being able to save her, but promised that her sacrifice was not in vain. The wind moved gently around him as if carrying his words into the sky. In that moment, he felt a sense of peace that he had not experienced in years. His story was no longer about revenge, but about transformation and strength. He turned away from the grave and walked forward into a future that he would define on his own terms.